OK, let's take a look at today's front pages. The Sunday Times this morning says Putin has wiped out an entire city. Ukrainian President Zelensky has accused the Kremlin of waging a war of annihilation, as the governor says Volnovakha no longer exists.
The Sunday Telegraph says people will be allowed to sponsor named Ukrainian individuals or families to stay in their homes as the government departs from its earlier approach to the refugee crisis.
It's hell here is the headline of The Independent, with the people of Mariupol describing how they've survived 2 weeks in a city under siege.
Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove wants to seize the mansions of Russian oligarchs to house Ukrainian refugees, which is exactly what Laurie from Durham was suggesting. Good on you, Laurie.
Caring Brits are urged to house Ukrainians in their darkest hour. Big-hearted Britons will get £350 a month as a thank you for opening their homes to refugees.
Taking a departure from Ukraine, the Daily Star Sunday has an intergalactic exclusive as a reader claims he was visited by real-life men in black after he told police that he'd seen a UFO.
I wonder who they were.
I don't know.
Maybe police officers in black uniform.
I don't know. I'd love to.
I saw a thing. We are going to come to our lovely guest in a moment, but I saw a thing recently about the majority of people who spot UFOs have been drinking.
Really?
Conclusively.
Are you not a UFO believer?
Depends how much I've had to drink. Then I believe anything.
The truth is out there, ladies and gentlemen. It's out there. Let's go through the papers then with anthropologist Marianne Ochota and Tom Slater from Spiked Online. Good to see you both this morning. Let's talk Volnovakha in the Sunday Times, Tom, the city which it is claimed Putin has now completely levelled.
Yes, so Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of waging a war of annihilation in this eastern city in Ukraine. The images from there are absolutely horrific. The bombardment, there's shades of what Russia, the sort of war that Russia prosecuted in Chechnya and in Syria. And a lot of concern now about what will be the fate of the other cities in Ukraine. There's obviously been even more concerning developments overnight. There was that phone call yesterday between Vladimir Putin and the French President Emmanuel Macron, as well as the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, where he apparently showed no willingness to end the war, to come to some sort of ceasefire. And now all eyes are on Kiev, which appears to be being encircled by Russian forces as well. So hardly any cheery news in the papers this morning. But as we're moving into that 18th day of the invasion, it seems like Putin is becoming potentially more desperate but more brutal in that desperation, it seems like.
But I think also in terms of where his artillery are, where the military supplies are, you know, the kind of backup of supply chains. And there was that episode earlier this week between Poland and the US about whether they were or weren't going to be sending jet fighters to support the Ukrainian Air Force. And you know, lots of commentators were saying, actually, you know, a handful of jets isn't going to make that much difference. But strategically, I'm told, I'm not a military expert, but I'm told that that was potentially an opportunity where you've got that kind of column of Russian military hardware heading towards those positions around Kiev. You can target them because they're all in one place. At this point, they've kind of dispersed to the different positions so that they can actually encircle, potentially besiege, potentially, you know, rain down fire on Kiev. You know, we've got almost 2.5 million refugees, as well as the displaced people within Ukraine, as well as the people who are stuck in besieged Mariupol, who are having to drink water from their own radiators at this point. So, I mean, it's a blow-by-blow account, isn't it? I think that's the thing that is so horrific and compelling about this, that we're seeing every single episode being played out right in front of us.
Yeah. We really are. We're getting more detail on this conflict than we have from many others. What's in the Mail on Sunday, Marianne?
So this is Michael Gove's suggestion that we should seize luxury mansions that oligarchs own in the UK and use them to house fleeing Ukrainian refugees. Now, on one level, I feel like this is the kind of that's not a bad idea, except that you kind of go, well, how many pints have you had? Because how does this actually work?
Michael Gove said.
And it's not a tit-for-tat thing. I mean, if we ought to be seizing assets from oligarchs because it's kleptocratic money, then by all means go ahead and do that. But it's legal and due process. It's
a vote-winning comment, isn't it? And I know Laurie suggested it earlier on GBNews, and you can see why it's appealing. You can see why it sounds appealing. But the reality is, even if they could do this, even if they went through due process and could do it, how many people could they actually house? 100?
It's utterly daft. I know. And what is who is it who's helping these refugees who now waft around in a mansion in, you know, the darkest depths of Suffolk? It just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't,
at all.
and it's classic. It's classic. Like you say, Stephen, it's vote winning. But they've obviously done a bit of a poll, and they've asked people what we should do, and then Michael Gove has come out and said something.
But they've asked them down the pub.
Exactly, but appease the masses. Just tell them what they want to say. I just think that kind of statement from a politician is just really patronising for real people.
What do you reckon, Tom?
Want more?
No, I think it's just kind of overcompensating for how dreadful the rollout of the refugee scheme has been. You know, you're going to seize all these mansions, you haven't got any refugees to put in them at this point. I mean, as of a couple of days ago, we'd only granted about 1,000 visas so far. But other part of the Mail story, of course, is this rollout of this £350 a month scheme whereby anyone in Britain who wants to house a refugee family, they can, if they sign up for 6 months, and then they get this £350 each month. I mean, given what we were working with last week, this is a welcome move. It's much more generous than it was previously, where it was very limited to people who had family here. But again, you know, across the EU, they've just waived all visa restrictions for 3 years because we're in a crisis. And yet what we have is a scheme which will, you know, of course, you'll see a lot of very generous people coming forward to use it. But again, it has to be kind of funneled through this kind of very slightly bureaucratic process.
Yeah, but I mean, is there an argument to say, look, I mean, you've got the Schengen Agreement over there. We haven't anymore. So isn't it right that we get people onto this island? I mean, we want to be generous, but you've still got to check who's coming in.
Well, it depends whether it's a security concern or whether you're, you know, kind of attempting to stand by the principles that you were elected on, and which was controlling our borders and stopping those people coming here. And the thing is, if we're talking about housing refugees and the British people being warm-hearted, being welcoming, wanting to give people a chance, that refugees are welcome, that this is part of what made our nation great, Ukrainians are not the only refugees who are desperately fleeing in fear with nothing except what they can carry, with their children on their arms. What about all the people that we have absolutely forsaken in Afghanistan? What about all those Sudanese people who are, you know, facing death, certain death if they go home? And what we as a nation have said is, we don't want you here. Just because they're Ukrainian doesn't mean that they're more important refugees than all the other millions of people who are refugees in the world. And I think one of the things that really troubles me about the way this story is being played out, and now, you know, the papers today are all full of, aren't we amazing folk here in Britain? Great. I mean, there are many amazing people in our country, and I'm just, for the GB viewers who are about to tweet me, I'm proud to be British. Yes, I am. But
there's a level of hypocrisy and double standards.
It's so hypocritical, and it's racist. You've got to call it out. It is racist. Because what? Because they're white? Because it's a Christian country? It's different? It's not different. When you're fleeing for your life, you're fleeing for your life. It doesn't matter the colour of your skin. It doesn't matter your creed. We either offer a safe haven and a home, or we don't, and we should just be upfront about it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, fair point.
Love it.
Fair point. Tom.
Mega truth bomb from Mary Ann there. Love that.
Independent, looking at Mariupol, I mean, Mary Ann mentioned the conditions there. I mean, it seems like they're literally, they're not just trying to bomb them out, they're trying to starve them out now.
Yeah, I mean, a living hell is the headline here, looking at a particular story of people who are trapped in Mariupol, as Mary Ann was saying, tapping their radiators in order to be able to drink water, cooking on fires, living underground, effectively. This particular story talks to a 19-year-old welder and his family. They're currently one of 200 people who are living in a church, which has actually already been partially bombed out. It's just absolutely horrific scenes, obviously coming last week off of that maternity hospital, which was targeted by what people believe might have been thermobaric weapons. It's just absolutely awful, and especially given the fact that it seems like Russia is continuingly not keeping up its end of the bargain in relation to those civilian corridors, so people can even get out. They're just stuck there. Again, not only kind of facing an uncertain fate because of the shelling and because of the military operations, but even just being able to eat and drink and access medicine is absolutely awful.
I mean, it is such a shocking situation. And does this highlight, I mean, you talk about our attitude to refugees, does this highlight that some of the difference, at least, that we are seeing, that we can relate more to this, can't we? We're seeing people living in houses which we could live in over here, being bombed and being displaced. And I mean, there is that... there's an easier association, isn't there? Yeah,
and I guess, a few weeks ago you could have gone to Kiev on holiday, you could have, jumped on a kind of a cheap flight and gone for your stag do or what have you, or family holiday. There is some of that. But again, I mean, it speaks to my previous point, which is that suggests then we've got a lack of imagination and a lack of...
compassion.
Sort of global literacy that we kind of go, oh, well, they're like us, so they're all right, they're the good guys. And obviously there is that angle as well that sort of Ukraine versus Russia feels perhaps much more of an obvious, there's the bad guys and the good guys.
Cinematic, isn't it, in a way?
The David and Goliath. But I think that probably speaks to a lack of compassion on our part, that we can't imagine ourselves into
it's also
an apartment in Syria in Homs that used to exist.
It's also very much about us. It's about the media. It's about how we've portrayed wars over the years, and it's about how this war is also being portrayed now. I think, as an anthropologist, it must be a very interesting time to be alive for you, isn't it?
Interesting in not a great way. Yeah. And I think it does make you reflect. I think that's one of the things about this 24-hour news cycle, the way this story is being told, that there's lots of those first-person sort of human interest. That's kind of what they call it in the media. Those kind of like colourful accounts of, the girl who last week used to be a kind of hair and makeup blogger, now standing there with an AK-47, and, we kind of go, oh, that could be my daughter. And there are those things that form that human connection and that helps you put yourself in someone else's shoes. But we just need to be a little bit better at that, to kind of do it when the person doesn't, obviously, in very obvious ways, necessarily look like us. Yeah. But they are exactly the same. And someone standing in Yemen weeping over their dead children is exactly the same as someone doing it in Ukraine.
It's a fair point. It is a fair point. Marianne Hotter, Tom Slater, we'll catch up with you a little bit later on. Thank you.